Aye.
Hello guys.
Aye.
Hi Dario.
Dario, I think you need to mute. Great.
Sorry, Pinto, sorry.
No problem. Yeah, I think we can get started. Irfan, do you want to run?
Yeah. Maru, are we expecting Paul or Ivan joining? I was just checking if they also join.
I'll ping Ivan, but Paul is likely on a plane. He may or may not be able to join.
Cool. He sent out mail earlier to the Google group. So I have one or two items which I did put in our work group notes. We can talk about that, and we can talk about the list of items that Paul did send out. That seems okay for today's agenda.
Sure.
Okay. What I'll do, I'll just copy over what Paul did send out into our notes so that everybody can have the same reference. Okay, let's start. So, yeah, last meeting we had some work items which we basically need to have a look. So one of the items was, which I did take up was I had to check if it is easy to implement support for multiple binaries, building multiple binaries into Cube Builder. So the way it is done, I haven't I haven't done a lot of in-depth research, but high level, it's like Cube Builder has some automated YAML generation kind of a thing. So what it does is it generates YAML, and it can also create a Docker container, which can be pushed to a specific place. So some tweaking of this code would be needed. It won't be too much of an effort. Yeah, but it will be maybe a week or two of effort for one person to do that. So it's certainly doable. Like it's not like it will be too much of an effort if you have to do this and create multiple binaries for different controllers.
I'm kind of inclined to push it off. I guess my thinking is like, I would be happier. Well, I would be happy if we just had configuration for the controller managers. So
Yes, I was coming to that. That's the next point, which is noted in today's agenda. So Shashi did we had. I did create one issue earlier, and I think you also have, Maru. You also have one issue which talks about similar config kind of a thing for components. So there are multiple ways this config could be there. So one is about API server. Like if we are using the aggregated approach, we have the API server. In the API server, there is a possibility that at a given point of time, the API server, when it starts, it exposes only certain amount of APIs, not all, and which can be controlled by a flag. This is certainly doable. If we are going to the CRD-based approach, in that case, it will be the installation of the CRD. So whichever object CRD resource is created against the K8s API server, that is what the user sees. Both of these, the configuration is sort of already there. We don't really have to do much for API control of the APIs which gets exposed to the user. In controller manager, simple feature gates can be implemented, and I think Shashi did raise a PR also at like first attempt at that. So I think for alpha kind of stuff, this much might be sufficient. We might not need to do more than this. That seems logical.
yeah, I think that's reasonable. Post alpha, we can consider whether we want to pursue a different approach, including splitting into different repos for different controllers.
Correct. Okay, so the next one that I did list over here is like I and Shashi both actually faced. I did go through a cycle where I had implemented my controller, which was replica scheduling preference controller, and it all worked fine. And Maru, you for known reasons, you basically changed the informer and some portion of the code to work with dynamic client, and that also means that the most of the stuff had to be changed to use unstructured object. So using the dynamic client to some extent is okay, but using the unstructured object and then dealing with it and setting some fields in that and maybe getting information out of the unstructured object seems to be a lot more dirty, I would say. And I think it's quite error prone also, because there is no check on that. So it's not a structure that we are dealing with. We are sort of dealing with plain serialized JSON.
That's true if you're using raw unstructured objects. I mean, I'm not going to argue that it might be preferable to have two paths for the federated informer. But in terms of like how you interact with unstructured, you could just build a wrapper around it that, you know, gives you access to the things you want in a type safe way. I mean, that's what we're doing for things like placement. Since placement is basically homomorphic across all types, it just has a list of clusters. All you need is a method that translates, you know, between the unstructured field and a list of clusters or a slice of clusters. So I'm not being prescriptive. I mean, if you feel that a federated informer that doesn't use unstructured would be desirable, my hope would be is we could, rather than having two entirely parallel paths, we would have the ability to support either dynamic or typed client. because there's a lot of shared code in there.
Yes. I certainly agree. So yeah, I mean, this is not a pressing requirement as of now, because as you mentioned that there are mechanisms or ways of translating from unstructured to a particular object, that kind of stuff. So we have done some gimmicks, but I find that code is not just clean. It's not like real code which we should use when we are moving to, say, beta or something. Right now it might just work, it might be fine. So this is something like we basically maybe need to do long term. So
Yeah, no, fair. I think I'm pretty comfortable living in a dynamic world with a Python background. So for me, it's like I can sort of pick the level of type safety that works for me. But if that what works for me is not working for other people, I'm entirely in support of making you guys happy.
Yep. Seems fair. So maybe not now, but in due course of time, probably one of us will take up some effort to update this, like the Informer, which can support both kind of clients and both kind of objects.
Yeah, and
So,
I would encourage probably creating an issue around this. And kind of related, the federated informer today kind of relies on, like, each informer uses its own informer of the cluster state.
yeah, shared Informer. Yeah, correct.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, please capture these as issues, and we'll definitely, hopefully.
Yeah, just before the meeting, I realized that I haven't created this issue. I had the
Oh, that's
intention
fine.
to.
Like just
So I did put it
not
here
just me
so that
comment.
we do talk.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
One thought on that topic. Maybe, I don't know, Irfan, if you were thinking of creating these typed informers like manually for each type, it may be preferable to generate them.
Well, they're parameterized, just like all the informers in Kubernetes. You pass in some functions which basically provide type-specific behavior, and most of the implementation is generic in that way.
Okay, makes sense. I just wanted to avoid us. I think your main aim, I'm assuming your main aim of the generic one, did you call it a dynamic informer, was to avoid having to write code for every type.
Not really. Like the federated informer previously was implemented very similar to Kubernetes informers, where the instantiation would include functions that would provide type-specific behavior. The change here was moving to use the dynamic client, which it's still a specific, like it still requires some configuration. It just meant that rather than using like the federation client, it's using the dynamic client rather than dealing in objects that are kind of like just a generic like a generic interface for a very specific interface below it. It uses unstructured, which is just a bag of data. So anyway, that's a bit too technical, but there wasn't a desire to implement type-specific behavior. It just changed how it was implemented from a generic perspective.
Okay.
Okay, so moving ahead, now we can talk about the list of items that Paul did send. I think, I mean, going through the list of items, I had a short chat about this with Shashi this afternoon. To us, it seems like majority of the stuff which is listed here seems to be in place. What's not in place is like I and Shashi also did target about having the job high-level controller and the SPI high-level controller that we are targeting, that we should be able to complete within this month. If there is any work that probably might be needed over here, and we want to prioritize that among the list of these items, that we can talk right now, rather than going through each of them separately.
It might be helpful to just go through them briefly and just sort of indicate their status, because some of these might seem that they're like already done, and maybe they're not quite done from our perspective. And all this is stuff that we're intending to do the work on. I mean, I'm not saying we're not happy to have help, but we're not expecting people to sign up for the work, in other words, other than like review and Reddit, etc. So, so the walkthrough, we have most of that done. It's going to have to be updated in the transition to Cube Builder. And the part that is kind of half done, the test script that exercises the walkthrough, like the deploy federation script, kind of does it. But the goal is basically as a step towards getting end-to-end testing in CI, which we do not have yet, making sure that end-to-end testing is at least reproducible locally, like easily. So run this script, run the tests, bang, you can validate E2E. So our perspective is that's kind of a good starting point. There's not a lot of stuff that we're testing in E2E that isn't tested in integration, but we do want to have that capability in the hands of developers, if not in CI. We're not, notice on the list, getting end-to-end CI is not on this list. It would be a nice to have, and if the Kate's release pushes off long enough, maybe we can get to that. But we're not prioritizing it because I guess our perspective is that just getting something in the hands of users with some degree that it works is better than, oh, it always works. It's not that it's going to be totally broken. It's just that we're going to have to, trigger test manually for features that require it, probably DNS being the biggest among them. Does that make sense?
So what we are saying, like I noted that as we are not, E2E is obviously desirable, setup in CI. But we are not targeting that as a necessary item for alpha.
Yeah, it's like a stretch goal. We get to it, awesome. If not, it'll happen very shortly after alpha.
Yeah, setting if either of those DIND or Minikube are doable in the Jenkins, I mean, whatever machine or whatever VM that is used for the Jenkins run, then it might not be very difficult to run a E2E suit against those, right?
I mean, the catch is currently we're using Travis, which gives us a little bit sort of faster. I think it's just simpler, so easy to work with. Probably if we want to do like E2E and CI, we're going to need to move to Cube test infra. And that is going to be a little bit more complicated, if only because of the coordination overhead with the test infra work. So whereas with Travis, we just go and do stuff on our own. When we move to Cube, suddenly we're going to need to coordinate pretty closely with the test infra people. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
I meant, I meant not doing the test infra stuff because I think doing that is will take us quite much more time compared to. So as far as I understand, Travis offers you simple VM or that kind of stuff where you can run your script. That's what we are doing for integration, I guess, right now. There itself, can't we have some extension which can sort of download Minikube or download DIN cluster, whichever works cheaper in terms of resources, and run E2E. That's what I was in mind, because I remember that I created an issue about having E2E also, which I would not, I mean, either I or Shashi would not be able to look at before we complete our already assigned tasks. But that's what I was thinking. It might be a more cheaper, cheaper way of forward for us.
That's fair. I was kind of, for some reason, tying end-to-end to test infra, but yeah, maybe that's not required. But let's just leave it as a stretch goal, and if we find we have resources before Cube 111 becomes available, then we can revisit it.
Okay.
Just a quick question about CI in general. So it doesn't seem like we automatically run CI tests before merging PRs at the moment.
We do.
We do.
If you check every PR, there's a TIDE section, and TIDE is what runs the CI through Travis.
Oh, that's what I was just looking at, and I couldn't see anything.
If you go to any PR that's merged, Oh, wait, does it actually remove that status at the end?
Yeah, probably open PRs you might be able to see.
Yeah, open PRs. I don't know why it removes that.
That's the mistake I was making. I was looking at merge.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. All right.
Yep.
So the only thing that's missing, so it runs all the integration tests. It just doesn't run the end-to-end tests.
Correct. It actually does run end-to-end tests, but against, sorry, go ahead.
Somebody else was starting, right?
Go ahead. I was going to say that the tests, the closed PRs do have it. You just have to expand and view the details, and it's under the continuous integration Travis CI PR CI job.
Okay. Ivan, I think you can also answer Quentin's question about if these jobs are running E2E or not. I think E2E in some form is running, right?
Yeah, it's actually
You want to
running
explain?
the managed EDE, which is, as Maru I think was trying to say, is the same as the integration test. So it's a bit it's duplicating that behavior right now, and that's something we'll look to combine in the future to make sure we're only running through one set of tests. It's just running through a different framework, but it's ideally the EDE should ideally be testing the unmanaged infrastructure once we get there.
That's probably a little bit confusing for people who aren't working with it, but
Yeah, I thought you'll explain that.
yeah, the TLDR is that in the future, the end-to-end tests will be expected to run against both the integration fixture and sort of a deployed configuration. And the goal is just having one set of tests to manage, but being able to execute them against like environments with various levels of detail. So run quick, doesn't actually provide you with an entirely realistic scenario, run slower, but actually be full cluster. Right now we're kind of duplicating stuff, but it's all for the good.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that answers my question very clearly. It's in better shape than I thought it was because I wasn't following the right links. Thank you.
Maru, I did not understand the next. I mean, I did have some ideas like what this might be, but this pointer that Paul mentioned, test script that exercises a walkthrough in CI. Would you have some info on this?
So we have end-to-end tests, which will validate that features work against a deployed Kubernetes. The goal in terms of walkthrough is actually from nothing. It will deploy Kubernetes in a configuration, with Minikube or Docker and Docker. It'll install Federation controllers and types, probably ultimately via CRD, and then it'll run the tests. So the goal is actually making sure that the goal of that script would follow as closely as possible the user documentation, and it would be a way of validating that it would actually work for the user, not just, oh, I can get it working on my machine, but now the instructions we have some degree of automatic verification so that users don't come back to us and say, hey, it doesn't work for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you mean something like a local Federation E2E run right from scratch for any given user?
Yeah, and it's something we could run in CI as well, but certainly something that someone could run locally.
Yeah, so if this works, then ideally we should be able to run E2E in a Jenkins VM, right? It's like a local user.
Yeah, yeah. I guess they have something like this for service catalog, so Paul wanted to make sure that we had something similar.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Contributor documentation, I think this we already have to some extent. I'm not sure how official that might be, but yeah, some documentation already is there, thanks to you and Ivan, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's good progress on that front. It's going to have to be evolved in the transition to Kube Builder. So I think we're just keeping it on the list to make sure that we've polished it up. Like there's not no work left to do. It's mostly done, but we definitely have things to do after Kube Builder plans. And obviously we'd like, you know, if people want to review it and give us feedback, we're certainly trying to find people who are less familiar with Federation to give it a look-see and give us feedback, both internally and externally. And same with getting started diet. It's just making sure that we're leaving time or remembering that we still have some work to do to get the documentation done pre-alpha.
Okay. Yeah, the next two items, I guess. This might need some talk.
The CRD and Q builder.
Yeah.
So Ivan's been working on Q builder for a while now. He's scheduled to go on PTO next week. So I'm kind of joining that effort. The goal, we found another reason in Lindsay's been working on getting the cluster registry, the CRD edition of the cluster registry integrated into Federation v2. And in the process, we've discovered there's just hassle around dependencies. And that was added another motivation for transitioning to Q builder is that we will dramatically reduce the footprint of our dependencies because we no longer need to like build an API server. So I'm working on that full time as of now. And the goal is to probably do the move to cluster registry, the CRD edition, and Q builder they're kind of joined at the hip, I think, because moving to Q builder will reduce the footprint of dependencies such that there won't be conflicts that we're seeing with the current PR.
Yeah, so why I said some talk needed because if we say we need to move the infrastructure to Q builder, then basically all the controllers have to change some infrastructure and code. Right now we are using something, some mechanism of starting running the controller and that kind of stuff.
It should be largely similar. I mean, I'm if you want to participate, I'm happy to have your contribution. I'm not I'm not assuming I'm going to have any contribution. So for me, it's a matter of migrating all the types over, making sure that they'll deploy and test, and making sure the controllers still work. But I think the major thing for the controllers is going to be the way the use of the clients might change to some degree, but I don't think there's going to be a huge, it's going to be work, but I don't think the controllers are really the largest point of impact there.
I agree. I agree what you're saying. So most of the code remains similar for controllers, but some infrastructural code, like how the controllers are started or how the binaries are built, that kind of stuff might be different.
Yeah.
In terms of API, why I said that is because at some point of time, we are going to use the same repo, right? And at some point of time, we might need to sort of flip or switch over to the new infrastructure. If that has to be done, then whatever code that we already have for all the APIs ideally should be moved and then the switch should happen, something like that. Or what is there in mind that you
I wish that were going to be possible. I think my goal is I'm going to be maintaining a long running branch and
yeah, that's the second
transition. I'm going at the point of transition, I'm going to coordinate with you and Shashi and the folks on our side and anybody else who's doing work and try to get everything that is major into the tree and then cut over. I mean, the most of the work from what I can see is just in the type transition, moving to the new generated types as a base and then copying the functionality over. So if you're working on a controller and you're working on a type or two, it's not going to be a huge amount of work versus converting all the existing types. That seems to be most of the work that I'm anticipating.
Okay, but you mentioned what I was, I had in mind was what's the strategy you already mentioned that you would maintain along the running branch. And when most of it is basically up and working in that running branch, then the switch can happen.
Yeah. I'm not intending to do piecemeal stuff because it looks like it's an all or nothing thing just because of the dependencies. So cut everything over, I'll, work on this branch. And at the time that, I'm getting close, then I'll start seeing how we can get everything into the tree so that it minimizes disruption for others.
Cool. Seems fine. That seems fine.
And yeah, and so as part of that, we'll move to cluster registry CRD. And then we really won't have any dependency on an API server other than Kube API server.
That also seems nicer, I guess.
I mean, it's simpler for the user because then rather than
Yeah.
having to worry about running an API server .cd for both these things, you just install CRDs and run some controllers. So it's definitely, I'm looking forward to that, removing the need for aggregation. It does impose a cost and validation. Ivan's currently investigating that. And we should have something that is, the hope is that we get something that's basically as functional as we have today. I think that's achievable. Adding something that does more validation may have to wait for dry run, which is the 1.12 timeframe. Which is still beta, so I think we'll get there.
Yeah, what you just said also brings another question. Like, your current plan of having the validation is using the dry run. Like I saw that in federated type config, you have to do a good amount of validation for whatever resources that are being created against that config, that type.
Yes, that's a good question. I mean, for anything that requires more than field level validation, that would imply a webhook. And so, like it or not, that's kind of the cost of CRD is we're going to get good at writing webhooks. And my hope would be is that over time, we end up writing kind of a framework for webhook validation so that adding a new type isn't a matter of doing custom work. It's a matter of just leveraging existing efforts. But from the starting point, it'll be like, oh, I need to perform more than field level validation, like the relationship between fields, which is not something OpenAPI specification allows for in terms of defining relationships between fields. Then you need to write a webhook and write Go code. Kind of, it adds a certain amount of friction where previously you could just write a function and it would be called by API machinery. Now you have to implement a webhook, make sure it's deployed, and point to that webhook in your CRD configuration.
Maru,
Hi, Dario.
in the Cube, I investigated a little bit the problem of creating a webhook, at least in validation.
Yeah.
And in the Cube builder, there is an issue to track this, the automatic creation of webhooks.
Okay, cool.
I'm going to put in the chat this one.
I guess it makes sense that we're not the only one that needs that. So if it can be implemented in Cube Builder, then we don't have to do it.
And I did also a small proto, but at the moment I cannot share the repository because it's not so nice and I need to clean up a little bit.
Okay.
But it's not incredibly difficult to do that. The problem is, the bigger problem I think is certificate rotation that at the moment I did not implement. And there are not a huge amount of documentation for that.
Right.
But I think is feasible because Istio folks are doing that, if I understood correctly, the repository.
Okay.
I can investigate and let you know.
Yeah, that sounds good. And that sounds promising, at least, that other people are going to solve this for us. Yeah,
Yeah, probably. Thanks.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks, Raju.
So it is a moving target, but I would expect like in the 6 months between now and, or 5 or 6 months, however many, until we get to beta, I would expect that we would have a solution for validation that was simpler of what we're anticipating today. And in terms of dry run, like probably the future will be both dry run and webhooks. Webhooks are needed to validate any functionality that is federation specific. The dry run would be more for validating the embedded type in a template. If I have a deployment embedded in a deployment template, I would ideally be able to pass that deployment to a dry run like validation, and that would mean I wouldn't have to duplicate that validation in in any way. I would just say, is this valid? And Cube would come back and say yes or no. And the same thing with CRDs. Like if I'm a user, I implement, a webhook for my validation. Using dry run, we can tie into that webhook validation trivially. You don't have to write any special case handling or whatever or call the webhook ourselves. All we got to do is try to create the resource in Cube with the dry run flag true, and then Cube will give us back an indication of whether that's going to be valid.
Okay, that seems like a reasonable workaround. Like, I'm more concerned with the functionality. Like, it shouldn't be difficult for the users, or they shouldn't get we already have one issue which is like we don't have necessary defaulting in Federation, and when that resource is basically created in KTS, then it can, it can fail because of no necessary defaults over there. So I find that more bigger an issue compared to this kind of stuff that we are talking about.
I'm not really familiar with this issue. Have we talked about it before, or is there an issue for it?
Okay. I think I went back in time. So that is what you solved using the
comparison.
The comparison
right.
of the versions.
Yeah. So hopefully that shouldn't be a problem with version comparison versus actual value comparison, because we don't actually care what the data we're sending around is, as long as it was updated or not updated.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
Okay, moving on. Feature gates. I think we already talked about this at the beginning of the meeting. So
yeah, I think that's covered.
That seems okay.
So namespace level placement. Is everyone familiar with what that implies? It's kind
Maybe you can explain once, because
okay.
Yeah, I and Shashi had a chat about it, but we have a little differing opinions about this. So
okay,
yeah, please go ahead.
So the goal was, in the issue, I called it like simplify placement. Currently, if you want to put a resource in a cluster, it's required to have a placement resource specific to that type that says you need to go to that cluster. And by simplifying placement, my idea was it should be possible to specify namespace placement and have that apply to all federated resources in that namespace if they do not have any resource-specific placement directives or decisions or whatever. And that would allow sort of a namespace to serve as an implicit like application boundary. If I wanted to create a namespace and it would contain only, the set of applications or the single application that needed to go to this set of clusters, rather than having to define placement for every single resource, which could be kind of exhaustive, I could just say, I want all resources in this namespace to go to these clusters. So the goal isn't to limit the fine-grained control that is currently in place. It's just to relax the requirement for users that don't need that sort of fine-grained control. And I guess for me, I think it's important to get this in an alpha so that there's like easy usability for people who have like relatively simple needs. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So concept is well understood. What we were wondering, I think this is not implemented as of now, right? So namespace-based placement for all the resources that exist within that namespace is not there in implementation, right?
Correct. I've started on it, but I'm kind of halting that effort pending moving to Cube Builder, and I'll pick it up after.
Okay, that makes sense. So what I'll put this as is it's not necessarily gating feature for alpha.
I think for me, I wouldn't necessarily gating or not gating. Like for me, it's a priority, just because I think having a very simple UX to start is advantageous. And it also would hopefully get people thinking of the idea of application boundaries, sort of as a precursor to maybe considering adoption of the application CRD that the app SIG is has been working on. So yeah, you're right that it's not critical. It's a nice to have. But for me, I'm still thinking it's important and I want to get it in alpha. I'm not going to obviously compromise the other stuff to do that. But I think given the timeline for alpha, I think there should be time for it.
Okay, makes sense.
Maru, question about that. Is namespace-based default placement, I guess, whatever the term is you used, is that a special case of other defaulting per namespace? I can imagine wanting to do things other than just placement per namespace with the default. The question makes sense?
And not entirely. What are the other things you were thinking of?
Well, so any template substitutions, there might be default template substitutions that apply per namespace. And any other, basically any defaulting. So if we're going to have defaulting at some point, would the defaulting be global for everyone in the federation, or would the defaulting potentially be per namespace? And
it could be both. I mean, I think what you're proposing is maybe orthogonal to what I'm talking about, in the same way that placement is separate from, like, you have a placement resource and an overrides resource, and one does defaulting and one decides like where things go. And so I'm not saying that we don't want to approach that, but I'm not anticipating that as a near-term goal. If you think that's a feature you'd like to have, then I'd be happy to discuss it or like add an issue and we'll prioritize it, etc. Certainly sounds useful. I haven't really thought about it.
yeah.
Okay.
And I guess that would be, I mean, if I'm thinking about defaulting for an entire namespace, that maybe implies metadata only, because each type has different fields otherwise, like labeling or annotations or something like that. But
Yep. Moving ahead. So, yeah, there is an item about release. So what we might basically need in terms of cutting over a release.
So Paul said he was going to be working on getting an image build, which means, I mean, having something that's triggered, having a place to put it, being able to document where to get it from, that sort of stuff. So I guess he's already done that for service catalog. So.
Okay, makes sense. As far as I understand, if we already move to, say, Cube Builder, it already has the infrastructure to build the image.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much like about building it from the repo. It's more about making sure
how it's
job to actually build it and push it somewhere.
Correct. So how it's presented to the user.
Yeah, and I think Travis has some ability to do that as part of like a GitHub release. So when you make a GitHub release, it could trigger a build and push something somewhere. So
yeah, this makes more sense. It'll sort of become like a particular commit basically triggers the CI, and the CI basically builds the image, and that is what we release. That makes more sense.
Yeah, I mean, once we go alpha, I think the idea is that we'll probably need to we'll probably want to release like subsequent alphas, like with bug fixes or alpha 2 or whatever. So the goal is just getting infrastructure in place to make that release procedure easy, and obviously that'll carry over to what we actually do, beta and beyond.
Okay. That makes sense. Integration tests, what exactly probably he meant by these?
I don't know. I mean, we already have that stuff running in CI, so.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
No, maybe he had some extension or something in mind, but we don't know.
No, I think just to be clear, Paul just wanted to make a list of all the things that we cannot, or that he didn't want to go to alpha without. Many of them he explicitly said are already done.
Right. Okay.
Okay. I guess, I don't know, Maru, you or Ivan, I guess, has added this list of addendums from Paul.
I think Quentin added that.
Okay.
It's based on
okay.
his email that he sent. He responded to Quentin's question about certain types, support for federating certain types.
Okay. I think I missed that mail.
Yeah, it just came through.
Okay. So
my point was on his list of alpha blockers, there's actually no mention of the ability to federate anything.
I guess it's just implicit, but yeah, we should have support for any of those types. And I mean, as far as simple propagation goes, especially with the CRDs, becomes really trivial to add support for any of these. I mean, we're doing it with Kube Builder, so it's doing niceties with clients. But if the user wanted to just write some CRDs to represent the template placement and optionally the override, you can do that with writing any code and just apply YAML to a Kube server. And the way it's written, I mean, you write the CRDs for the primitives, and then you write a federated type config that references those, and then a propagation controller will automatically be started. So it can be actually codeless, actually gotten to the point where you don't have to write code to propagate things.
yeah, simple propagation. Simple propagation wouldn't need any kind of writing code. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if we do a release, we end up doing a release. I mean, I'm just taking a hypothetical scenario using the API server builder. Then we will need to list these types, right?
Yeah. No, you're right. It's good to be able to say we support these out of the box anymore. Here's a procedure you have to do to support things we don't immediately support. But I mean, the long-term strategy, I think, hopefully pre-beta, is that we actually generate CRDs for all these, and we could either do it, via configuration, or we could do it on demand or automatically. But we could literally federate every single Kube type without having to write code. And so the goal would be getting to beta, I think, and saying, if you want to federate something, create this API resource that says, I want to federate this thing. And then all of the primitives required and the configuration required will be created automatically. And so the load on the user will be minimal. For simple stuff anyways. Obviously, like you said, if you want more advanced behavior, then you probably want to write your own types and associated controllers.
And this should have been discussed as one of the benefits of moving to CRDs, right? For simple propagation, user does not need to write any code anymore. Like no auto generation of clients and all that stuff is needed, right?
Correct. I mean, it's nice to have clients if you're working in Go code, but if you're kind of working in the YAML configuration space, then yeah, you don't need code.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yeah, this is done. Any other point we might want to talk about?
I kind of have a quick question.
Yeah, Shashi.
Actually, for the feature of that cross-cluster service discovery, we did put in the code in another repo. So I was just curious, like, how would you envision releasing that feature in the future?
I mean, my assumption was it would kind of be like say Service Catalog today will do a release when Kube does a release. And so similarly, like the cross-cluster service discovery, when Federation does a release, it would do a release, maybe in advance, and then the Federation release would actually reference the image. because presumably there'd be some way to start the controller in Federation. It would say, run this YAML that references this specific image that was published as part of the release for that repo. Does it make sense?
I think what Shashi intends to ask is it okay? Right now it's under his username, GitHub username.
Oh.
Is it okay to leave it there, or we should ideally move it to maybe Kubernetes 6?
I mean, I think it's fine to have it in a personal repo as long as you don't mind that it, I mean, like to me, like the idea that you have to have it in an org, I think the main reason you want to have it in an org is for legal reasons. So once you move it to the Kubernetes org, then you want to accept contributions from other people, and there's sort of legal implications of that. And if you have it under the Kubernetes org, there's kind of a process that minimizes the potential for legal problems. So as soon as you want to start accepting contributions from other people, I would encourage you to donate it to the org and put it into the working group.
Yeah, I would recommend that we just do that right now. We just create a repo under Federation SIGs. And
yeah, I kind of was in discussion with Paul regarding that. I think the one outstanding thing is about the license issue. There is a project called FASA, so which I ran, and it seems like is throwing some issues related to license. Basically, you need to. It may not be a critical issue, just that you need to open source that code. Something like that is there. So I'm not sure how to handle such issues. Maybe I'll track it with Paul.
Yeah, my understanding that they're actually just trying out this FOSSA tool, so it's intended to check the licenses of all dependencies in a given repo and determine whether it thinks that they are all compliant. And I don't think that it is giving any of our repos at the moment a clean bill of health at all. So I don't think you need to, consider that you're special, that you're failing any FOSSA test. They're only just piloting it now. So I would just go ahead on the same procedure we followed to create the Federation V2 repo. We just follow that procedure to create this new repo. Okay. Federation V2 doesn't pass FOSSA either.
Okay.
Cool.
So one more issue that I put on the agenda, I should have labeled it with my name, but as part of the transition to KubeBuilder, I'm going to have to basically touch every single existing type. And it occurred to me that this might be a good time to consider removing the federated prefix from resources. And I guess I have two rationale for doing that. We discussed it in the past, but just to revisit it. One is that it just adds verbosity, and I'm not sure, given that we're in a group, we're in a group inversion API-wise that don't really necessitate that. So it's just like federated secret versus, say, secret template or secret placement versus federated secret placement. I don't know if that adds a lot of value, and I wanted to bring it to the group before I put in a lot of work to change it.
So I think we actually decided this already. I'm not sure why we ended up with federated secret in the code at all, because we did have this discussion in the past, and we minuted the fact that we decided to remove the
Yeah, I think we don't need any more discussion. This should be done.
Okay. Sorry, I
Cool.
guess I wasn't clear on that, and momentum just kind of carried through. So I'll make sure that gets removed in the transition to KubeBuilder then.
Yeah.
Everybody's okay with type template, so like secret template, which is what we've been referring to all this time anyway. It was kind of confusing. It was called a federated type versus a type template.
I guess my only concern there is that the template is actually the thing inside that thing. so the thing that is currently called a federated secret actually has a template inside it of type which reflects the Kubernetes secret. So calling the outer type a template is maybe not the right thing. I would recommend just calling it a secret.
That's not possible. There's a problem with the way the kubectl, to use a very strange name for kubectl. But the way that it refers to resources, even though there's group inversion, and you kind of think, well, that's a namespace, and I can name it whatever I want. If you name resources identically, even across groups, that kind of presents a challenge from a user, like a CLI perspective. So it's been recommended by Paul and other people who've had experience with trying to name things the same that you actually differentiate.
Yeah, Maru, I remember, Quinton, I remember this discussion already did happen, and it's somewhere in the notes. I'll try to find it out. The decision that we did take was that whatever is called federated secret right now, which Maru, you are suggesting naming secret template, would remain as federated secret, and everywhere else, like in override or placement, wherever a federated string is unnecessary, it would be removed. So eventually the three resources would become like federated secret, secret override, and secret placement. This was the conclusion we had as part of the prior discussion.
So I guess we have kind of a trade-off. It's either we call something like a template explicitly, which Quentin, you don't seem to be happy with, or we have a difference in the naming scheme between template and placement and override. And I personally, I don't know, like, what do you think, Quentin? Is avoiding the duplication of the template name worth having an inconsistent naming scheme?
No, I mean, I don't like either, to be honest. But and to be clear, the reason I'm not worried about the duplication of template. It's the fact that there are actually two different things that are logically called template. There's the template inside that thing, and then there's the wrapper around the template, which we're now also calling a template. And I personally just find that confusing. And the thing that you're proposing to call secret template is not just a template, because it actually has a bunch of other things in it too.
Sorry, what does it have in addition to the template?
Actually, Quinton, there is nothing there. So we have separated all that stuff which is supposed to be part of this federated secret into different APIs.
Oh, if that's the case, then I'm less concerned. Sorry, I thought there was other federation-specific stuff in that type over and above the embedded template. If it is just the embedded template,
yeah, it is that.
I'm not entirely clear why it's embedded.
Yeah, that's the only thing. Like we sort of have to treat it as a different resource.
So your concern would be that you would like to see like a secret template look basically identical to a secret and similar to all the other types?
Well, it's a question. It's not.
Oh no, I'm
enough to be a proposal. But if a secret, if what is currently called a federated secret, we're proposing to rename to a secret template, is nothing other than a Kubernetes secret with a wrapper around it that contains nothing, then I'm not clear why we need to do it like that.
There's a minor reason. I'm not saying this is a justification for continuing to do that, but in the move to using the dynamic client and unstructured, having a common, like having a spec, like subtypes like secret don't have a spec. Having a spec as the entry point to the data used to create like the target resource for a given cluster means there's no special casing.
Okay, that I can buy. I mean, I always thought it was a bit crazy that secret didn't have a spec in the first place. It seems,
yeah. No, I agree. But at the same time, I mean, for the few types that buck the trend, and is secret the only one? Or I don't know, is config map also kind of dumb that way? But I mean, if those are the only two types, I mean, there could be the case that we want a special case behavior for those two types, which is possible, right? And then each type spec would, I remember. There's some dumb thing around, like, because we're not strictly speaking, it gets into the metadata, I think, is what complicates it. I'm going to suggest that we just leave it as is for now, and we can maybe revisit it if we need to, like pre-beta. Right now, it's going to be a lot of work to just get this working, and I don't really want to get down.
So when you say leave it as is, leave it as a federated secret.
No, I'm saying leave the context. I think like having it called a secret template to me makes sense. And then whether we in the future move to having a secret template actually look exactly like a secret instead of the complication with having it look exactly like a secret is like the metadata, because the secret template is not a secret, and its API version and kind will reflect that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I also had that this discussion earlier with you folks. So the metadata would be version and kind, but the group would be different, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Like
So,
I think this is maybe a longer discussion than we're at time.
I'm
now,
happy to
but
leave it. I agree with you that we can discuss it all we like, and if we can't get it to work in practice, it's academic. So I'm fairly happy. I just wanted to make sure we hadn't missed a trick there. As for the actual name of this wrapper thing, whether it be federated secret or secret template, if I understand correctly, the only reason why we're it's mostly about name clash resolution.
yeah.
So there would be relatively little reason why we, sorry, I've got a noisy something going on here. I can't get rid of it right now. So because of some complication in kube control, if I understand correctly, you can't have things in different namespaces with the same name, which seems to completely blow my mind why we created these namespaces in the first place if they have to have unique names in them.
no, I don't think it's
a unique name.
Yeah, it's a recommendation. It's a recommendation.
It's just, yeah, the UX experience, you'd have to explicitly specify the group as
Group
well
version
as
and that name.
So it makes typing out kube control commands really lengthy because you have to be really explicit on the type and the group that you're specifying.
But I think, I mean, my personal recommendation would be that some person chooses what group they're working with. They either set an environment variable or some configuration so that the default is that thing, and then they just use the right names. And if they want to step outside the group that they're working into a different group, they either specify that on the command line or change the configuration. But rather than essentially forcing everyone to pick names that don't overlap, how does the sorry, getting off the topic, and we're kind of out of time here, but I'm just wondering how the kube control dynamic or magically discovers which group you're talking about. Does it use the unique type to figure out which group that's in?
Yeah, I think it uses the discovery endpoint. If you give it a kind, it'll go and look up that kind, and if there's ambiguity, then it'll complain. And I think that suggests that if the danger is if you were to add a new resource called the secret, suddenly that would confuse. If you just wanted to use the original secret, kube control would be like, but there's more than one. And so it's not just that it affects the UX for your new kind, it actually affects, I think, the UX for anything called what your kind is called.
Everybody else.
Yeah, which is, I think that's the pain point that makes it an intractable problem, and you just want to use a unique name.
Fair enough. I wouldn't say
we can revisit this. I mean, in my mind, we just want to get something good enough for alpha. Mm-hmm. And if people find it, intolerable, anything that we're doing, or we can find a better way to do it. I mean, we have the option to, modify it pre-beta.
Yeah, I mean, the main point I guess I was getting to is, how do we know that secret template is unique to us? It doesn't say anything about federation. There's no way of guaranteeing it. There's no way of guaranteeing that anybody else is not going to use it. And if you expand that across, all the different types, the probability of a name clash becomes even bigger. So essentially what we need to do is reserve some name pattern, and say this is ours, and we're consistently using this name pattern. I thought that was the namespace, or group, but apparently that is not actually what that does.
It is from an API perspective.
No, I'm referring to the usability problem now.
Right, yeah.
So the requirement is that we all use unique names to get around that problem.
As far as I know, yeah.
How do we generate those unique names? How do we make sure that our name is unique? So in that world, like federated secret seems like a better choice than secret template, just because we can put federated on the front of everything. We can say anything that's prefixed with federated is ours, and we don't think anybody else is going to, create federated secrets outside of the multi-cluster federation working group, and therefore we can ensure name uniqueness. I'm less convinced if we have things like secret template, and I presume that applies to secret placement and other things. Those are far less obviously federation specific names.
But if we claim them now, then they're ours. I agree with
well,
you.
there's just no consistent pattern across the board.
I know. So I agree with you on the problem. I mean, to my mind, I don't know. I mean, it literally is like a land grab. Like if you get out there first with your name, then other people kind of.
So for alpha, I would suggest we just use the federated prefix. That's what it is at the moment. I don't like it either, to be clear, but I don't like the alternatives yet either. And so if we just say all names that start with federated belong to us, that seems like a fairly easy message to send. To say that anything that has the word template in it belongs to us is difficult. And I would imagine we'll just end up going and having to change it again in the future. And given that, so.
I mean, I guess I'm kind of, I don't know. Naming for some reason is harder than actual technical problems for me. Because I agree with both sides. I mean, I think the federated prefix is kind of dumb. And I think we can get away with just like basically using template, and we become the people who use template. And if you want to use that, well, tough luck.
Well, except that it breaks our stuff as well as their stuff. And anyway.
But I mean, it's kind of on them in the same way that, Cube has claimed secret. So nobody can really use secret.
Well, so that, I mean, if I were to, off the cuff, propose a solution, I would say just ignore that requirement to create unique names. And they need to they're going to have to go and solve that in Cube Control anyway. And the solution is to say, I'm using my primary, what is it? No, not namespace group. API group is X. And so whenever I'm username, I mean X. Unless you can't find it in X, then feel free to go and find an alternative in one of the other API groups, and then you never get clashes. And you basically have a priority of API groups, and you find the highest priority one, and that's the one you use. And then all of these problems go away. But I'm not about to fix that in the -8 minutes we have left. So let's table this discussion and leave it the way it is for now. Would be my suggestion.
Okay. Everybody else agree with that? We're just going to leave federated prefix in place?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Quentin. It's not ideal, but I think until this gets addressed, and it's probably going to become a larger issue as CRDs become more mainstream, if somebody's not already working on something like that. Seems like the Cube config should be able to specify a default namespace, which you can today, as well as like a default API group.
Okay. We'll leave it the same it is.
Just to be clear, Maru, I'm not happy either, but can't think of any better solutions right now.
Yeah, I mean, it was just an opportunity, if I have to touch every single one of these types to clean up the naming. But if we just leave it, then that's fine. I mean, in the future, I think we're just going to generate this stuff anyway, and there'll be a lot less work if we do want to change the name back.
That's a good point. All right.
Cool. Thanks all.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.